Hello, everyone. Welcome.
Hi, I'm Lily.
Hi, I'm Oliver.
Welcome to Science in Easy English.
One simple sentence about today's topic. Can loneliness actually kill you?
It's a pretty heavy question to start off with, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. And looking through the sources for this deep dive, I actually had to put the papers down a few times and just, stare at the wall for a minute.
I had the exact same reaction.
Because we usually think of loneliness as, well, just a mood.
Right.
Like you're sitting at home on a Friday night, your phone isn't buzzing, and maybe you just feel a bit bummed out because you missed a party.
Exactly. But the research we're looking at today, it paints a completely different picture.
It really does.
We're looking at a massive convergence of data here, from the U.S. Surgeon General's advisory, the World Health Organization, and some really intense neuroscience from places like UCLA.
And the headline statistic that everyone seems to be quoting right now that comes from Dr. Julianne Holt-Lunstad.
Yes, the famous 15 cigarettes a day stat.
Right. I've seen this floating around social media for a while now, and honestly, I always just dismissed it as clickbait.
It sounds like hyperbole, doesn't it?
It does. Like, how can sitting on your couch alone be the exact same as inhaling smoke from a pack of cigarettes?
Well, when you dig into her meta-analysis, which, by the way, covered huge populations, the mortality risk numbers line up perfectly.
Wow.
Her research suggests that lacking social connection carries a mortality risk comparable to smoking up to 15 cigarettes a day.
That is just wild to me. So we aren't talking about, oh, it makes you sad.
No.
We are talking about it physically shortening your life.
Exactly. The data shows it increases the risk of premature death by anywhere from 26 to 29%.
That's a massive jump.
And to put that in perspective for you, that risk factor is higher than the risk posed by obesity, physical inactivity, or even air pollution.
So statistically speaking, it is more dangerous to be lonely than it is to just be completely sedentary.
Yeah.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because if I eat a ton of junk food and sit on the couch for 10 years, I know exactly why that's bad for my heart.
Right, you understand mechanics.
Exactly. I understand cholesterol and clogged arteries. If I smoke, I know what the tar does to my lungs.
Mm-hmm.
But loneliness, that feels abstract. It feels like it's just all in the head. So what is the actual mechanism here?
And that is our mission today. We are going to move past the feelings and really get into the biology of it all.
Perfect.
We aren't just talking about feeling sad. We're going to dig into the cellular changes, literally looking at gene expression and inflammation that happen when a human being is isolated.
We're going to find out why our bodies treat loneliness as an actual mortal threat.
Yes.
I love that approach. Well, I don't love that it's killing us, but I love the science of it.
Right.
But before we get into the cells and the genes, I think we need to clear up a definition.
Okay, let's do it.
Because looking at the Surgeon General's report, they make a really specific distinction between social isolation and loneliness.
Yes, they do.
And I feel like, I can be alone without being lonely.
Right. That is a crucial distinction.
Huh.
And the sources, particularly the papers from preprints.org, they make a really big deal out of this. You have to separate the objective situation from the subjective experience.
Okay, so break that down. What's the objective side?
Social isolation is the objective side. It's basically math.
Math.
It's a measure of how many people you see, how big your network is, or whether you live alone. If you don't talk to a single human being for 3 days, you are socially isolated.
Got it. You can literally count that on a calendar.
Exactly. It's a data point. Loneliness, on the other hand, is subjective. It's an internal state.
Right.
The definition the researchers use is the distressing feeling of a gap between the connections you want and the connections you have.
Well, that totally explains the classic cliche of being in a crowded room, like a party or a busy office, and feeling incredibly lonely.
Precisely.
Yeah.
You can be completely surrounded by people, but if you don't feel seen or understood, you experience that gap. And conversely, you could be a monk on a mountaintop, not seeing a soul for a month, and feel perfectly connected and at peace.
Because you aren't craving more interaction than what you already have.
Exactly.
So it's about the mismatch. It's about wanting connection and not getting it. But why does that mismatch hurt so much?
What do you mean?
Well, physical pain makes evolutionary sense. It tells you to take your hand off a hot stove.
Right.
Why did we evolve to have emotional pain just because we haven't hung out with our friends lately?
That brings us to the evolutionary theory of loneliness.
Yeah.
And you actually just nailed it with the stove analogy.
I did.
Yeah. Physical pain is a signal to protect your physical body from immediate damage. Hunger is a signal that you need fuel. Thirst is a signal you need hydration.
Okay.
The evolutionary perspective argues that loneliness is exactly the same type of biological alarm.
It's a survival signal.
It is. Humans are what biologists call an obligate social species. We are simply not designed to survive on our own.
Because we don't have claws or thick fur.
Right? We aren't that fast. For hundreds of thousands of years, our primary survival strategy was the group.
So if you were separated from the tribe, you were dead.
You were a snack for a predator, or you starved.
So your body evolved a distress signal loneliness to basically force you to get back to the safety of the group?
Exactly. It's your brain screaming, hey, you're vulnerable.
Yeah.
You are exposed. Go find your people before you get eaten.
That makes total sense in the Stone Age. But the problem is, in the modern world, if I'm sitting alone in my apartment on a Friday, I'm not about to be eaten by a saber-toothed tiger.
No, you're not.
But my body is reacting as if I am.
That's the crux of the entire problem. Your ancient biology is misfiring in a modern environment.
Wow.
And that brings us to the specific physiological damage, because this is where the research gets really granular.
Right, because I asked earlier how a feeling causes a heart attack.
Yes, and it starts with the HP axis.
I saw that in the notes, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal system. It sounds like a mouthful, but it's basically the stress control center, right?
Think of it as the body's main threat response system. When you are chronically lonely, your body keeps this system switched to the on position.
You are constantly flooding your system with cortisol.
The stress hormone, yes. The research shows that lonely people have what they call flattened cortisol slopes.
The flattened cortisol slopes. That sounds like a boring graph, but in reality, that's an absolute disaster for your energy levels.
It really is. Ideally, your cortisol should be like a wave. It spikes in the morning to wake you up and get you moving, and then it drops off at night so you can sleep and repair.
But in lonely people, that wave flattens out.
The regulation just breaks down. You're simmering in a low-grade stress soup all day and all night.
Which explains why lonely people often report terrible sleep, which we also saw in the data. There was that mention of micro-awakenings.
Exactly.
It's like your brain is keeping one eye open because it thinks you're sleeping out in the wild without a guard.
You aren't safe, so you can't rest.
What?
But it goes deeper than just hormones. It actually goes all the way down to your DNA.
Yes, the CTRA concept.
Conserved transcriptional response to adversity. This comes largely from the work of Dr. Stephen Cole at UCLA.
This was the part of the research that actually blew my mind. I had to read it twice. You're telling me that feeling lonely actually changes how my white blood cells read my DNA?
Yes. It changes gene expression entirely.
How?
Dr. Cole found that in lonely people, the genes that drive inflammation are upregulated. They're turned on high.
Okay.
And the genes that fight off viruses, the antiviral response, are downregulated or turned down low.
Wait, hold on. So my body is ramping up inflammation but turning off the antiviral defense?
Yes.
That seems like a terrible trade-off. Why would evolution do that?
It's actually a brilliant evolutionary bet, assuming you're living in the wild 50,000 years ago. Think about it. If you are alone, separated from the tribe, what is the biggest threat to your life?
Well, if I'm alone, nobody's going to give me the flu. I'm not near people.
Exactly. Viruses spread in groups. If you're isolated, you probably won't catch a virus. But you are at a huge risk of physical trauma.
A predator attack or a hostile injury.
So the body prepares for a wound.
Wow.
Inflammation is the body's first line of defense against bacteria entering a wound. So your body says, we are alone. The risk of a physical attack is high, so let's pump up the inflammation to heal any bites or scratches.
And we can save energy by turning off the antiviral system because there's nobody around to sneeze on us.
That's it. Exactly.
That is incredible. It's anticipating the specific type of threat. But fast forward to today.
And it's a total disaster. We aren't fighting wolves. We're just sitting in our apartments or scrolling on our phones. But that inflammation is still pumping.
And chronic inflammation is basically the villain behind almost every modern disease.
It damages the blood vessels, leads to plaque buildup, and causes cardiovascular disease. The sources mention a 32% increased risk of stroke and significant increases in heart disease and diabetes.
It's your own defense mechanism turning against you just because the environment has changed.
It's really a tragic loop.
And speaking of loops, this leads us right into another paradox in the research.
The brain's paradox.
Yeah, because if my body is screaming at me to reconnect, if the pain is there to make me find people, you'd think lonely people would be the most social butterflies out there.
Right, you'd think they'd be desperate to talk to anyone.
But the research says that's not what happens at all.
No, it's not. And this is fascinating. There were some neuroimaging studies mentioned in the UCLA research that looked at the ventral striatum.
That's the reward center of the brain, right? The part that lights up for sugar or money.
Exactly.
Hmm?
When lonely people see pictures of close friends or social scenes, that reward center lights up like a Christmas tree.
So it shows a yearning for connection that is very similar to a hungry person looking at a menu.
The craving is definitely there. They want the connection intensely. But, and here's the twist,
Yeah.
chronic loneliness also changes how we perceive social threats. It makes us hypervigilant.
Because if you're alone in the wild, you have to be on guard. You can't trust anyone you don't know.
Exactly. If you're isolated, you don't have backup. So the lonely brain scans for threats absolutely everywhere. Research shows that lonely individuals are more likely to interpret neutral faces as hostile.
Really?
Yes, they're more likely to read a text message as sarcastic rather than friendly.
So it completely distorts reality. You crave connection, but when someone actually walks up to say hi, your brain goes, watch out, they might hurt you, so you withdraw.
And that withdrawal makes you lonelier, which makes you more defensive, which makes you withdraw even more. It impairs your social behavior.
You become awkward, defensive, or even aggressive, which just pushes people away.
It's a self-fulfilling prophecy driven entirely by a biological safety mechanism.
And just to prove this isn't just in our heads or some human cultural thing, the sources mentioned animal models too, right?
Yes, they've seen this exact same pattern in rhesus macaques and rodents. Social isolation changes their gene expression and brain architecture in the exact same way.
So this is deep-seated biology. It's not just a mood swing.
Not at all.
So we've established that this is a biological beast. It rewires us. Now I want to pivot to who is actually dealing with this beast.
Let's do it.
Because this was the part of the research where I actually had to stop and double-check the source date. If you asked me to draw a picture of a lonely person, I'm drawing an 80-year-old widow living in a big, empty house. That's the stereotype we all have.
It is the cultural stereotype, absolutely.
Yeah.
But the data completely flips that on its head.
Yeah.
We have data here from the Navia study, Pew Research, and the Surgeon General. And the group with the highest rates of loneliness isn't the elderly at all.
It's young people, specifically the 16 to 24 age group.
That's right. The Navia study cites that 1 in 4 young people in that demographic report feelings of isolation.
And another source from Norton Healthcare cites a Harvard study saying it's nearly 30% for young adults.
It's staggering.
That seems so counterintuitive to me because they are technically the most connected generation in human history. They have Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat. They are talking to people digitally 24/7.
Right.
How can they be the loneliest?
Are they connecting? Or are they just observing?
Oh, that's a good point.
The sources suggest that social media is a double-edged sword. It can be a tool for connection, but very often it replaces real-time, face-to-face interaction. And remember our definition of loneliness from earlier.
The gap between what you need and what you get.
Exactly. And social media is basically a machine designed to widen that gap.
You're sitting at home scrolling through a feed of people having fun at parties you weren't invited to or looking at curated perfect lives.
FOMO, the fear of missing out, is basically a loneliness engine. Plus, that age bracket 16 to 24 is a time of massive transition.
Yeah, you're leaving school, maybe leaving home, figuring out your identity.
You don't have the stable social structures that older adults often have, like established careers or long-term neighborhoods.
The data talks about a U-shaped curve, right?
Yes. Loneliness is incredibly high in young adulthood, then it dips down in middle age. Presumably when people are busy with families, careers, and established communities.
And then it rises again.
Right, in the oldest age groups, usually due to mobility issues or friends passing away.
But it's important to note, if you're listening, this isn't just a rich country problem or a Western problem.
No, the World Health Organization is very clear on this. They launched a commission on social connection because this is a global public health priority.
They estimate 1 in 6 people worldwide are affected. It's happening in Japan, in the U.S., in Africa, everywhere.
It's a true global epidemic.
Okay, so we have an epidemic. It's destroying our arteries, rewiring our brains to be paranoid, and hitting the youth hardest. We cannot end this deep dive without talking about how to fix it.
We definitely need some solutions here.
Because if the problem is biological, is the solution pharmacological? Like, is there a pill for this?
There isn't a pill in the pharmaceutical sense. You can't just take a connection blocker. But there is a prescription.
Okay.
In fact, one of our sources from the American Journal of Lifestyle Medicine explicitly talks about social prescribing.
I really love this concept. Instead of just giving you an antidepressant or a beta blocker for that heart condition, a doctor prescribes what? A club.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Bingo walking groups, art classes, community gardening. The idea is that the healthcare system needs to treat social connection as a vital sign, just like blood pressure.
If you are lonely, the medical solution should involve getting you physically connected to a community.
It makes perfect sense. If the problem is isolation, the cure is connection.
But the sources are pretty specific that not all connection is created equal. I was really struck by the research from Jamie Krems at the UCLA Center for Friendship Research.
Yes, she makes a really bold claim. She calls friendship the silver bullet, or the #1 antidote to loneliness.
More than marriage, more than family.
According to her research, yes.
Yes.
We often put so much weight on romantic partnerships or family obligations, but friendship is unique because it's entirely voluntary.
You choose your friends.
Exactly. And having a strong circle of friends, even just a few meaningful ones, is incredibly protective for your long-term health.
And speaking of meaningful, this brings us to what I think is the most practical, actionable insight in this entire stack of research.
The helping versus self-care study.
Yes. It comes from Naomi Eisenberger's lab, also at UCLA. And this one really hit home for me. Because we are always told, oh, you're stressed. Treat yourself.
Right. Take a bubble bath.
Have a glass of wine. Do some self-care.
We are constantly taught to turn inward to heal. But Eisenberger's lab found that acts of kindness toward others reduce depression and anxiety more effectively than acts of self-care.
That is so fascinating. So helping someone else is actually better for my brain than helping myself.
Yes.
Why does that work biologically?
It goes right back to that threat response we talked about. When you engage in caregiving, you are activating a completely different system in the brain. Caregiving is fundamental mammalian trait.
Right.
When we care for others, our biology calms down.
It signals safety.
Exactly. Think about it. If you have enough resources to help someone else, your primitive brain assumes you must be safe. You aren't the victim, you're the helper.
It breaks that cycle of hypervigilance. If you are helping someone, you aren't fearing them.
It is a massive shift in perspective. If you're feeling lonely, the instinct, the defensive biological instinct, is to hide and protect yourself.
But the cure is to do the exact opposite. To go out and do something for someone else.
Precisely. It overrides the entire alarm system.
So practical steps for you listening. The sources suggest we don't need to become the most popular person in town to be healthy.
No, definitely not. It's about small steps. Reach out to one friend. Send a text. But also understand quality over quantity.
You don't need 1,000 followers. You need a few people who you feel truly understand you.
And perhaps most importantly, reduce the passive scrolling on social media. Use tech to make a plan to see someone, then get off the tech.
That seems to be the golden rule here. Tech is a tool, not a replacement.
Right.
Okay, let's wrap this up. We've covered a lot today. Loneliness is a biological alarm bell. It's not a weakness. It's your body trying to save you. But in our modern world, that alarm gets stuck in the on position, wrecking our immune systems, our hearts, and our genes.
And it's hitting everyone from teenagers to the elderly. It's a literal killer hiding in plain sight.
Before we go, leave us with one final thought. We've looked at all this data. What's the one thing that you want the listener to walk away thinking about?
I've been thinking a lot about what I call the paradox of technology in relation to all this. We are, on paper, the most connected civilization in human history.
We can video chat with someone on the other side of the planet instantly.
Instantly. And yet we are seeing this devastating epidemic of isolation.
It really doesn't add up.
It does if you look at the biology. The source material suggests that while AI and algorithms like the ones mentioned in the UCLA neurobiology research can mimic connection and can even learn 10 million times faster than a human, they cannot replace the biological necessity of empathy.
Wow.
We need the physical presence, the vulnerability, the messy reality of another human being. That empathy is the biological glue that holds our physical health together. We can't code our way out of this. We have to connect our way out.
We can't code our way out of this. That is a really powerful place to leave it. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
Stay curious and stay connected.
Bye, everyone.